Hey everybody, welcome to Ask Dr. Jill, brought to you by the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention and our friends at The Mighty. I'm Brett Ween, I'm the Senior Communications Writer at AFSP, and I am here with Dr. Jill herself, Dr. Jill Harkavy-Friedman. Hey!
So good to be here.
Yeah, we are looking forward to this. We're going to be taking your questions on mental health. The topic is family, and so send your questions in. If we don't get to them today, we'll respond in the comments a bit later on. And so just to get started, while you write in your questions, I thought we could tell everyone a little bit about ourselves.
I think that's a great idea. You want me to start?
You can start.
Okay, so I'm Jill Harkavy-Friedman. I've actually been working in the area of suicide prevention since 1984. I know I look much younger than I am.
It's impossible that it would be 1984.
But it was a time when nobody wanted to talk about suicide. And in fact, the chairman of my department wanted somebody to study adolescent suicide, teen suicide, and also to do some research on it. And for 3 years he had been trying and nobody would do it. Why? Because they were afraid that if you said the word suicide, you'd make somebody suicidal. And that's because nothing was really known about suicide, particularly in teens. So I was like, I'll do it. And that's how I got into the world of suicide research and prevention. And I started by developing a clinic, an adolescent clinic that I called the Adolescent Depression and Suicide Program. And they were like, you can't put suicide in the title. And I was like, how will they know where to go? And so from there on, I've been doing research in the area of suicide prevention and for a long time. And I think we've made a lot of progress over time.
And I mean, some people are still afraid to ask someone directly if they're thinking about suicide, and we now know, thanks to researchers like Jill, and that it actually won't put the idea in anyone's head. It will typically actually make them feel relieved because someone is willing to have an awkward or uncomfortable conversation with them. So there's a lot that we take for granted. Now that even 10 or 20 years ago people didn't know. And Jill's I don't know if we said this.
No, I'm the Vice President of Research here at American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and I'm also a clinician because I think they go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. What's the point of research if it's not helping people?
Exactly. And just before we get to your questions, I'll tell you a little bit of my background. I'm the writer here. I work on all kinds of different types of writing, and I worked in publishing before this. And I have a personal connection to suicide prevention, which is that I lost my mom to suicide about 7 years ago, and for a lot of people, it's a surprise, and for me, it was not. It was shocking, but it wasn't surprising. I grew up, even when I was a little kid, it was my mom and me, and she was the funniest, nicest person you could possibly imagine, but she had what I came to understand later was a really serious personality disorder, and she struggled a lot with mental health and was often suicidal and attempted a lot, so it was tough. So I imagine that's where I'm coming to this from, and I now realize from working here that it seems like this sort of existential mysterious thing when someone struggles with suicide, but it's really it's a health condition the same as if someone you love dies of cancer or heart disease.
I think that's the thing that people don't realize, because we see the last event or two that stressed them out and maybe precipitated suicide or suicidal behavior, but what we don't see until we look back, and we're trying to help people to look in the present, is all the things that went into that moment when somebody is thinking about taking their lives or actually tries or actually dies by suicide. And so there are health conditions, mental health conditions, other things like maybe childhood trauma, head trauma, having a chronic illness, having a alcohol or substance use problem. So there's certain things that kind of set the stage But you might have those things and never even think about suicide, let alone try to take your life. But then there are more things in the more here and now, like the stresses, like being intoxicated, like being in a depression, that can actually lead somebody, when the stress comes along, to actually try to take their life. And usually decision making is challenged at that moment. People can't think of alternatives, but they usually also want to stay alive but don't want to be here, and they're usually in a lot of pain.
Mm-hmm. That's well put. Yeah, and I mean, we always want to, I think it's natural for people to try and like figure out some reason why did someone take their life. Oh, it's because they lost their job or they got a divorce or whatever, and it's never for one reason.
Right, and actually what I always do is I say, well, 50% of married couples get divorced, and very few people actually die by suicide. Right. Even for people who've made a suicide attempt, 95% will go on and engage in life. So it's not the event, but it's the state that somebody's in. They're not being able to think of alternative things to do. Mm-hmm. And that's part of why reaching out is so important. So you want to, the first sign that you're not feeling well, or you're feeling persistently down, or like you don't belong, or you're a burden, that's the time to step up and reach out.
Mm-hmm. And help is always available.
Yeah, the problem is that people often don't feel like help is available.
Exactly.
So that's why we're talking about it today. One place, if you're ever in a crisis moment and you really feel that you can't go on, you can call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255, or you can text the crisis text line. Just text TALK 741-741. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline can also help you figure out how to find treatment. So if you're worried about someone, or you're worried about yourself, but you're not actually in, an immediate crisis, you can still call them, and they'll direct you and give you some help in how to get started on the track to recovery.
Mm-hmm. So, all that being said, we are excited to take your questions, so write them in. And are you ready to get started?
Let's do it.
Let's do this. All right. Looking down at my phone here for this. Here's our first question. I'm a high school student, and lately I've been really anxious and sad. I love my parents and I want their support, but I don't know how to talk to them about it. I'm worried I'll freak them out. Keeping things to myself doesn't feel right. What options do I have?
So thank you for bringing up that question. I'm sorry that you're feeling sad and anxious, and I hope that you will, in fact, reach out to your parents, because what you're saying is you want to reach out, and I would trust that. Keeping it to yourself makes the negative feelings and the pain much more powerful. And when you have that conversation, and you know what? They probably won't know what to do. They'll probably be scared, sad, in denial, any number of things. But that's why you have a conversation and you talk it through together, and together you can figure out what to do and what the resources are. And even at our website, afsp.org, there's lots of information to try to understand what's going on and to get help. So if your parents aren't the person to talk to, find somebody else, another adult that you feel comfortable with. But please do talk about it, and I think you'll start to feel better.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that, what's the statistic? It's like 1 in 5 people on any given year have some kind of mental health challenge.
Yeah. I mean, this is the way I look at it. We all have mental health.
Right.
Sometimes we feel well, sometimes we don't feel so well, and sometimes we have a health condition we have to manage. But the only way you know that is to go and have an evaluation and find out what's going on. Sometimes your hormones could be off, and once your hormones get put together, you'll feel better, and that's what the problem is. So getting an evaluation and even talking to your doctor about it can help get things rolling.
Mm-hmm. I have actually a follow-up question for that question,
mm-hmm.
which is, are there any, like, if this person is looking for like specific things to say to their parents, like, how do you bring it up? Or are there things that you shouldn't say, or?
Well, there's nothing that you shouldn't say, because whatever you're feeling is what you're feeling.
Right.
But you may want to acknowledge that you might not know what to do and they may not know what to do, that you want them to take it seriously. Explain to them that it's been going on for a while. It's probably interfering with either school or friends, and really just let them know that you need their help. And if they say, oh, you're just going through a phase, you're going to have that conversation anyway. So just try to help them understand what you're feeling. And what you're saying is you love your parents love you. So I'm guessing that'll take shape as you start to talk about it.
All right, cool. Our next question comes from someone who's worried about their brother. Person says, he and I used to be really close, but we don't really talk anymore. He doesn't seem like himself lately, and I'm really worried about him being depressed and that he might do something. What can I do?
Well, sounds like you've picked up on something in your brother. And we have a saying around here. Well, we have two.
Two sayings.
Two sayings. Well, we probably have 20, but
3 sayings.
One is trust your gut.
Mm-hmm.
If you're worried about him, you're not going to cause any harm by checking in with him to see how he's doing. And he might even brush it off, but you might be picking up on something. So you want to also tell your brother what you see and what you miss about him and the things that are making you worried. Like, we're not as close anymore. You're kind of withdrawing. You're sleeping all the time. The other saying is talk saves lives. And so having that conversation is really important. And if you're not sure, I'm actually really excited about this. We've released with the JED Foundation and the Ed Council a public service campaign that has videos and information about how to have that conversation. If you're with me, I've probably showed you that video. But there's a series of them, and it's called Seize the Awkward. And you can find it on the internet at seizetheawkward.org or on Instagram. And I had a situation where a friend was worried about somebody. Mm-hmm. We published an article about how to tell a friend you think they need therapy. She wrote and said, I want to do that, but I'm not sure how. And I was like, go to seizetheawkward.org. And she had that conversation and made a big difference for her friend.
Yeah, seizetheawkward.org is great because, there's tons of, clinical stuff on our website, on afsp.org, and that's a great place to check out. But seizetheawkward.org is specifically geared toward younger people, and there are really fun videos where it's like the personification of the awkward moment popping up in between people in different situations and giving you specific tips on how to have a conversation if you're worried about someone or if you're...
and what to say after.
Right.
Once you start that conversation, what do you say afterwards?
Mm-hmm.
I like that it actually has sentences that you can use.
Exactly.
If you're not sure what to say.
Mm-hmm. And then there are a bunch of videos that are from a lot of pretty major social media influencers who you probably know. I was watching one from Hannah Hart the other day, and they're all great, so yeah. I don't mean to single that one out. But yeah, so that's something to check out, and it's actually just kind of fun.
But to get back to your question, if you're worried about your brother, and that's coming from a caring place, and that will come through, as long as you don't make it a fight or an argument, but just compassionate and respectful. And remember, when people aren't feeling that well, they're not always the nicest, so you kind of have to persist.
This is true. I would also say, I guess, I think the tendency with human beings,
AKA people.
AKA people. Now I sound like an alien, like I'm pretending. For humans, people, we naturally try and problem solve when someone comes to us with a thing, which sounds like a problem. And I think in general we kind of say you should pretty much just put on your listening hat, which doesn't have to be a real hat. Could just be an imaginary hat, but listening and just not trying to problem solve,
and not being judgmental.
Right.
You feel what? That doesn't make any sense. You should know that's not true. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that just makes someone feel like you don't really get it. Mm-hmm. And there's no right or wrong thing to say, but listening makes a big difference.
Yeah, and it's you may feel like it's not doing anything, but it actually, for that person, having someone just listen actually is, and it may not even seem like it, but it actually probably is making a big difference.
And you may be the first and only person who reaches out to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's that whole thing of like someone cares enough to have this like kind of awkward conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, trust your gut. So here's something. I live with depression and am in therapy. My doctor has brought up the subject of medication, but my parents again, parents, wasn't it Will Smith who first said parents just don't understand?
Except parents like me, of course.
Yeah, no, Jill would understand, and your parents maybe do understand. My doctor's brought up the subject of medication, but my parents are a little resistant to the idea, and I'm worried it might change my personality. That's interesting. Will I still be me if I'm taking something, and if I decide to try it, what should I tell my parents?
This is a really good question, and you're not alone in having these questions, and your parents aren't alone in having those questions. Medicine sounds like a really big word. It's not drugs, it's medicine. That's the first thing to think about.
Mm-hmm.
If you had another health condition, if you had diabetes and you had to take insulin,
Right.
you wouldn't be saying, should I or shouldn't I? And your parents wouldn't be either.
Right.
And the thing that we have to remember is that the brain is an organ and it has chemicals in it. And when they're out of balance, you could feel deeply depressed, or you can have strange thoughts, or you can be all revved up. And what medicine does is it tries to fix that balance. Now, there's no happy pill, and sometimes it takes a while to find the right medicine. But the first thing is to have that conversation and have it with your doctor. And if it's helpful, have your doctor have it with your parents as well. But medicine is an add-on to therapy. So that's why we don't have a pill that we can give, but taking medicine with therapy for the person who needs it can make all the difference in the world. Mm-hmm. And the whole idea behind medicine is that you should feel like yourself. And so part of knowing if a medicine is working or not
Right.
is if you don't feel like yourself, then something needs to be changed. In other words, first, it takes a little while for it to work, so give it a few weeks before you decide if you're like yourself or not. But if you are feeling spacey, or you're feeling irritable, or you're feeling hyped up, or groggy, some of those things go away after a couple of weeks. If it doesn't, then talk with your doctor. You might need more, you might need less, you might need a different medicine. And even though sometimes people say they're all the same, they're really not. And sometimes someone who does well on one or might not do as well on a very similar medicine. So it's a process of figuring that out. But this is going to sound funny, but you're kind of stuck with you. The whole idea is to help you be who you are, not with either such anxiety that you can't function or such deep depression that you can't move and be yourself. So that's the goal, is for you to be who you are and keep talking about it with your parents and your doc.
Yeah, and it's tricky because, you know, when like you take something for a physical health condition, it's like, oh, my knee was hurting and now my knee isn't hurting anymore. When it's
Right.
your brain, it's like this weird paradox where it's like it is an organ, but it's also you. It's like your soul, right? So it's confusing.
Yeah, but it's still you.
But it's still you.
We don't think about the brain as an organ,
Oh,
but
okay.
it is. I mean, we think about the brain. It is an organ, but we forget that. And
Right,
we
right.
think it's... And what's amazing is that the cells in your brain, neurons, are always growing and they can change. And even psychotherapy can change your brain to help it function better. So, but the problem with medicine is when you're feeling like yourself, that's the time to stay.
Mm.
Like, you often make the mistake and say, oh, I feel good now, so I'm going to stop. And no, when you're feeling well, that means you're on the right medicine, the right amount. Stay on it for a while, and then once things stabilize, then have a conversation with your doctor about whether or not to stay on it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely don't stop it on your own, because there are effects if you stop it quickly.
Okay. And I want to throw out a plug for a great thing to watch if you have HBO. There was an off-Broadway show called Career Suicide with a performer, Chris Gethard, who he talks about how he thought going on medication he was worried he wouldn't be as creative. And he talks in the show about how he realized later on it actually probably helped him.
Right, because you're not creative if you're lying in your bed and you can't move.
Right, or the ideas he was having when he was in like a manic state or whatever were terrible. Looking back, they were terrible ideas. And he's actually
Hakeem Rahim talks about that too.
Yeah, and Hakeem Rahim's another person who we've worked with here, who is a poet and someone with lived experience of mental health challenges, and so yeah, it's good to like keep in mind that you're not alone, whether you're someone who's going through something or has suffered a loss. There are a lot of us, and people are more and more, willing to talk about it, I think, particularly young people.
It's really great.
But it still can be a little bit like you feel alone. So our next one, someone writes in, this is a tough one, I lost a good friend to suicide on February 7th.
Oh.
So that's pretty recent.
Sorry.
Yeah. I'm very sorry to hear that. What is the best way to help with the healing process? I have a difficult time believing this happened.
Yeah, well, it's pretty shocking when you lose someone, especially to suicide. And grief is a process. It just takes time. Things that can help one person may or may not help the other, but usually reaching out and being reached out to. So if you feel you need to be with people to grieve together, rather than waiting for them to come to you, reach out to somebody and let people know that even though they don't know what to say, just being there is important. It's a very sad thing, and one of the questions that people often ask is, why? And that's because our thinking is clear, and we think there's going to be an answer to why. And part of grief is understanding that there are many whys, and the way you understand it at one point in time might be very different from the way you understand it, just a few hours later. But allow yourself to grieve, and then allow yourself to come back to life. It's okay to recover. You're not forgetting the person. You're not ignoring them. You can bring them with you as you go on to your life. But at some point, you need to reconnect. There's no time frame, so there's no right point. But we do know that if you're having just this really intense longing and you're not able to get back to life, and you just have this depth of sadness that even over 6 months or a year doesn't go away, we call that complicated grief, because your healing process, it's like when you have a cut and it gets infected, that's a complication. Well, grief is a process of healing, and if you don't heal, then there are actually treatments that can help with that. You're not alone, but you should be healing in your process of grief. And if something gets in the way of that, then check in with your doctor, or if you have a therapist. Talking about it and having a safe place to talk about your friend and about how you feel can make a big difference as well. There are also support groups, and there are some teen support groups. We actually train people here to run support groups. Now, I also find that, you probably find this too, that our walks are a great way to get comfort and heal. Do you want to say a word about that? Yeah,
I mean, the walks, I'll mention, and you can see it on afsp.org. You can find all kinds of stuff, including our walks, including also once a year there's Survivor Day, which is where people from all over the world actually come together in communities everywhere who have lost someone to suicide. That was really meaningful to me. And just to go to one of the walks, just seeing, you can read statistics about how many people are affected by suicide, but just seeing tons of people together. In some communities there might be smaller groups, but knowing that it's one of like a gazillion
you're not alone.
Events. Yeah. I also wanted to point out, reach out to your local AFSP chapter.
Right.
That you can find on our site pretty easily, because there's a thing called the Survivor Outreach Program, where we've trained people who have lost someone themselves to get in contact with you either in person or by phone or video, and talk with you, because that can be really helpful if it's just happened.
I just want to say one last thing about it,
Yeah.
which is, as you look back, you may realize that there were signs that you didn't know were signs. And so sometimes that can, bring on some other feelings, even feelings of guilt or anger. And be kind to yourself, because ultimately it was that person in their state of mind and not reaching out to get the help, and that they were just in terrible pain. And that's why we try to educate people in advance about what the risk factors and warning signs are, but many times you start to piece it all together after the fact. And just know that if you could have done something, you would have done it. And we all do the best we can.
Yeah, I mean, I remember after my mom died, and it wasn't a surprise. I was in therapy. My guy had talked to her occasional guy. And yet still there were moments where I'd feel like in a pretty good place. Like I knew logically I'd done all kinds of stuff, done whatever I could, and I shouldn't feel guilty. And there would just be moments where it felt like the floor dropped out for me, and I would think, oh my God, what have I let happen? So it was almost like a physical, like, grief for at least a few months, where I'd be fine and I'd be lying on the couch reading or watching TV, and then suddenly, and I'd be fine, and I'd even sometimes feel fine, and I'd just cry for like a moment. And my wife would be like, "You okay?" And I'd be like, "Yep." And I'd feel okay, but it's...
Well, because there's nothing wrong with crying.
Yeah,
it's
crying's
actually
good.
relieving.
And look at me now.
Don't look.
Don't look.
Just kidding. But
so,
reach out. It's a process. We don't have an answer. We just can, there are people along the way. Not everybody's going to know how to deal with it, and people deal with it in different ways. Should we take another question?
Yes, I think we should. I'm looking down to see what we've got. So someone writes in, so far I've been diagnosed with BPD, so bipolar disorder,
or borderline.
Excuse me. And
I find that confusing myself.
It's so confusing, and what it is BPD, bipolar, and anxiety. So that's a tricky one. I do feel as if I have ADD, ADHD. There are a lot of acronyms here. Suicide thoughts are common with no intentions. So that's... Well, I'm sorry to hear you're feeling that way.
Thank you for sharing with us what you are experiencing. And I'm so, in a way, this will sound weird, but I'm glad, because more and more people are sharing their mental health conditions, and people have them, So often there's more than one thing going on. So even if you have bipolar disorder and then you have anxiety on top of it, when you actually I hope you're finding some treatment for that helps you feel better. ADHD or
now I've psyched us out with the
acronyms. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. By the way, I specialize in learning disabilities, so that's just among other things. That's an entity unto itself. Now, oftentimes people will say that young kids look like they have ADHD, but they have bipolar disorder, or vice versa, and it can be hard to tease apart. So what would be most helpful is a really thorough evaluation about like a psychoeducational evaluation, so they could look at your neurocognitive functioning, look at your capacities, look at how you problem solve, and together figure out whether or not you're also having ADHD. With all of these things, there are medicines, but there are also tools that you can use to manage your life like anything else, and have the life you want to lead. But it's all about managing, being flexible, because these states change, and allowing yourself to get help. One of the things that people often find helpful is when there's family or friend who know what you have, then you can use them as part of your, I like to call it your entourage, and just agree that they will let you know when you're maybe going off course, because early intervention is the most effective if you're starting to struggle. For those who aren't engaged with any kind of clinical team, you can also call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255, and they can help you find local treatment. We also have information on our website as well.
What I also found interesting about that question is that it sounds like the person has suicidal thoughts, but no intentions.
Well, one of the ways I think about this is we all, our thoughts come and go, and it turns out the therapies that are most helpful help people to manage those thoughts when they come up, so they don't stay focused on them and they don't act on them. So just because you're thinking about suicide, which is distressing, I mean, it's probably a sign that maybe things need to be tweaked a little bit. Doesn't mean that you have to or you're going to act on it. Sometimes it's even a way of coping, of gaining a sense of control. So, if you can understand what those thoughts serve for you, sometimes you can find something else that serves the same function but works better for you. So it's all about managing those, and then the more you manage that and all the stuff, your life, your mental health, those thoughts may go away, they may come back sometimes. Use that as a signal of how you're doing. But you're right, you don't have to, want to die. It's good, just because you're thinking about suicide.
Yeah. Here's a really interesting one. My father took his life. So first of all, I'm sorry about that. My father took his life. Does this mean I'm at greater risk for suicide myself? Does it?
First, I'm sorry about your loss of your father. It's really, again, suicide is complex, and there are genes related to suicide and environment. Some of the genes we know about have to do with managing stress, so that's something you can do something about. Just because your father died by suicide doesn't mean that you're destined to die by suicide. So what it means, though, is if you start to see some signs that you're distressed or you're not feeling well, get it checked out. And just like if for people with cancer in their family, doesn't mean they're going to get cancer. But if you feel a lump or whatever, you have regular checkups. If you see something, you act fast. It's the same thing with mental health. If you find that your mental health is changing, and you should do regular mental health checkups with yourself, but also with your family and your medical team, if you feel that things are going off, check up on it, look into it, and take care of it. So it's an unknown whether or not you're at greater risk, but it's in a way inconsequential, because just because you even have a risk doesn't mean that you're going to die from it. So it's really about what you do with knowing that you have a risk. And it's scary, but we have so many things to prevent suicide now, so it's being engaged in your mental health and taking care of it.
And it's the same kind of thing, like we tell everyone to trust their gut in terms of the people that they know. Trust your gut for yourself also. We got an interesting comment. It's sort of a follow-up comment from someone else. People like me are scared to share that, yes, I have suicidal thoughts without intent, because they want to commit you right away, but I would never hurt myself.
Right, so that is, I know a lot of people have fear that if they talk about suicide at all, that they'll be admitted to the hospital. But that is not the case. It's usually people who are in a crisis moment, who are not in the moment in control or making good decisions. And lots of people have suicidal thoughts. It's a sign of distress, but it's not necessarily something like 60% of people have thought about suicide. So it's how you talk about it and who you talk about it with. If you are in therapy, let's say, and you talk to your clinician about it, you need to be able to have those conversations about suicidal ideation to understand what are the things that lead you to feel that way, so that you can find ways to either cope with that or remove yourself from that situation or protect yourself in some way. It's a sign. You're not necessarily going to be committed to a hospital because you've thought about suicide. If that were the case, most of us would have spent a little time. On the other hand, if you are in distress and you are thinking about it and you're not safe, that's a time to call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 1-800-273-8255, or text TALK 741-741 and reach out. But you raise a good issue, and you're not necessarily going to end up in the hospital. So please do talk to somebody and share it and learn what those thoughts mean to you.
Oh, that's a good way of putting it. I like that. Learn what those thoughts mean to you. Interesting. So we have another one that's interesting. My brother had a very traumatizing failed suicide attempt at my house almost 5 years ago. And our whole family gets horrible anxiety right around the anniversary. Are there things you can suggest we can all try together for some healing? He's still living and doing better. We just still struggle with anxiety and PTSD.
Right. Or fear that it's going to happen again.
Right.
You know, again, that's one of those times when talking to each other is really important. And anniversary events, it's not uncommon for those to raise anxiety or fear, or the thing is to talk about it, to acknowledge it, to plan how you want to deal with it. Maybe you all want to be together that day and do something fun to celebrate the fact that he is alive.
Oh, that's nice.
To have it sort of change the meaning. You're not going to forget that he did that, and you're probably always going to have a little bit of you that worries because you care about him. But also, each one of us has to process that kind of trauma deeply, whether it's through a family therapy or through individual therapy or through a support group. It's very scary when somebody takes their life or tries to take their life. And the person who did it knows how they're feeling, but the people around them don't. And so there's a lot of worry and stress that goes on. So if you can keep that communication open, to talk to him, not just about the attempt, but how is he doing now? And how are you doing now? And just keep that communication open.
And I guess, I'm asking you, Jill, because I don't know the answer to this, but I guess it's a matter of checking in with each other in terms of, like, you know, the breadth. It could be that you don't want to pay a whole lot of attention to that specific date.
Right.
Or that how you feel about that, or how your brother feels about it, that might change from year to year. Like, it might be a good, you know, for a while, like, let's have an excuse to have a pizza party or whatever, because that's always a good idea. Pizza's very important. But it may be that a few years down the road, it's like, let's not make this into a constant yearly thing.
He's not just a suicide attempt, even though everybody's traumatized about it. He's a person who has a suicide attempt in his past and needs to get beyond that as well. And just be taking care of themselves, because that's the key, and taking care of each other. And, you know, there are other people who have lived experience, or other people who are family members of people who have lived experience, and there's information about that. There are support groups for you to deal with your feelings. And, you know, just keep tabs on how he seems to be doing and how you're doing.
So I also want to, someone wrote in, they missed the name of the website we mentioned. It's seizetheawkward.org. You can also, aside from just our main website, afsp.org, for American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, if you go to afsp.org/realconvo, we have stuff in support of that Seize the Awkward campaign, where it is people, you know, there's a lot of, you know, younger people talking about their blog posts and some videos and things like that, supplementing it. So that's another thing to check out.
And I'll tweet out the Seize the Awkward after this. I do tweet.
Jill tweets. I tweet too. We're all in the social media.
Very modern.
Here's another one. I tried to talk to my family about having suicidal thoughts sometimes. They tell me how terrible it would be for my little brother and them if I did something. It feels like they're laying a lot of guilt on me, and it just makes me feel bad, but it doesn't stop me from having the same thoughts. What should I do? That's a great question.
Right. You know, thank you for sharing your suicidal thoughts, because I know that's difficult. Usually when that happens, it's just because they want you to be around and they care about you and they don't know what else to say. And so they know that you care about your family, and they're just hoping that to remind you that because you care about them, please don't do that. That's my guess. I mean, that's what happens a lot.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to make sure you remember your reasons for living. So just if you need to talk with them about it, try to have those conversations and let them know what it means to you, and that just because you're talking about it doesn't mean that you're going to do it. And in fact, talking about it can actually help you not do it. So it sounds like it's coming from a good place of caring about you and wanting you to remember that they all love you and care about you.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's scary for family members or friends because they care about you and they don't want to lose you. It's that desperate fear that they're going to lose you, and they don't want to. They want you around.
And then, I mean, it's tough because then if you're the person feeling suicidal thoughts, you're sort of trying to take care of yourself, but then you end up feeling like you have to take care of the people who care about you and are worried.
And I think also sometimes people think, oh, so I must be a burden, but you're not a burden.
Mm-hmm.
Being dead would be a burden. Death by suicide is so very sad and leaves people wondering and missing you. And so I broke my foot, and I was definitely a burden to my husband, and he's constantly trying to hold me up so I don't fall again, but it doesn't mean he wants me dead. He just doesn't want to have to carry my scooter down the stairs again.
Mm-hmm.
So just because you feel like a burden doesn't mean you are a burden.
Mm-hmm.
And let people help you, but you've got to let them know what they can do to do that. And not everybody's going to understand, so it's finding the people you can talk to. We have all these ideals about our family and our parents and what they're supposed to be like, and sometimes they are, but sometimes they're not the one that you can go to.
Mm-hmm.
So find those people and go to them when you're feeling that way.
Mm-hmm. There's a wonderful scooter metaphor in there also that I'm not quite sure how to work into something more. But yes, sometimes your family needs to carry your emotional scooter for a little while, but they won't always have to, and it's fine if they do.
Right.
So here's something, we're getting into like the nitty gritty, and we just have a few minutes left.
Right.
Someone writes, why does it take so long to see a mental health doctor when you need to see a doctor in an emergency?
That's a really good question. And depending on your situation, there are some avenues for seeing a mental health professional more quickly. Mm-hmm. The truth is, there's a shortage of mental health professionals, and we need to raise our voices to make it clear that mental health is health, and that we need to have places to go. We need to have appropriate care that's equivalent to physical health. There's not a good reason for it. Honestly, there's a lack of attention to mental health. There's a lack of access to care. Right now, we have mental health parity, which means that mental health has to be covered the same as physical health. But not that long ago, mental health didn't even have to be covered. It's through the Affordable Care Act that mental health is an essential benefit. So it is hard to find people. It's hard to get that follow-up. Let's say you go to the emergency department. Mm-hmm. Not all emergency departments have mental health professionals, but they're there, and it sometimes takes time to find the one that's right for you. So
what can someone do if they're reaching out and they need help? Do you have any tips, or just keep trying?
First of all, keep trying, because even if you get a list from your insurance company, some of those people, many of them are booked. Maybe they don't have time when you do, because there are a lot of people who don't take insurance, or there are certain areas where there just aren't mental health professionals around. Mm-hmm. But we're starting to have telemedicine, and it is being covered now by insurance. So you can look into telemedicine, which is working with somebody over the internet, and that can be helpful if there's no healthcare in your area. Go to the American Psychological website, Association website. They have find a therapist. We have a lot of resources on our website if you're looking for therapists, and just please be persistent. It's not easy. I'm not gonna kid you about that. It's hard, but it's worth it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the time, like, we say, you know, things that sound very simple, like, oh, if you're not feeling well, you know, get help. And it's true. It's not true, but you know, it's also like when you get down into it, the reality is it's not always easy and it's not always simple.
Right.
But you
and have somebody help you, because when you're not feeling well, that's not the time to be trying to find a therapist. And don't wait for a crisis. If you notice you're just not feeling great, go early when you have more stamina, more capability to find a good therapist.
Yeah, like most of the time I don't even feel like I still see someone, and I just I don't see him that often, but I check in every once, I'll go in and see him every few months or something, just to check in, so we're on the same page, in case something terrible happens and I won't have to
Start from scratch.
So
right.
Yeah, I think we are about out of time.
Yeah.
You know what? If you have more questions, you can also, we'll try and respond to things if we didn't get them in the comments. You can also send a question for Dr. Jill at submissions@afsp.org.
So glad that you brought your questions to us and then we had this chance to talk together. There's so much to say. But keep having those conversations. It's really important, even when you feel like nobody's there for you. Yeah, it's more, what you're going through is more common than you realize from people talking about it, because we're still, in our society, we don't talk about it as much as we should, but that's changing. Yeah, so you're not alone. We can pretty much guarantee that. Yeah. All right, thank you, and thanks to the mighty. Thanks for watching. Thank you.